Merry Christmas, it's Cristo here on Talk. It is a Merry Christmas, actually, for those people who are fans of reform, because they are set to become more popular than the Conservatives. Certainly in membership, certainly in rhetoric, certainly in public perception. But why do you think that is? And again, I'll ask you the question, is there policy behind everything that you are hearing? Policy behind the popularity? You know I love a little bit of alliteration. 0344 499 1000. Coming up as well, I would like to hear as well your nightmare postal delivery stories, please. Because there's a story today about fake deliveries. Apparently, there are so many fake deliveries. Do you know what a fake delivery is? It's when they tell you that your parcel's been delivered and it hasn't been. And they don't even try and deliver it, and then you get a notification to say, you know, your parcel's been delivered. The other thing I find very strange about all of this is our obsession with feedback about your delivery. I mean, do you get that as well sometimes? Can we keep the music going, please? Are we going to keep it going? Thank you. We'll keep it going while I talk, and then we'll raise it at the end. Thank you. Like the Titanic. We're going to talk about that this hour, and we're going to talk as well to Paul Scully about that. We'll hear more from you about why it is you think reform is popular, and of course we'll explore more about the reasons behind those tax rises and whether genuinely we have anything left in us when it comes to money that we're going to hand the government. So there is an awful lot for us to discuss live here on Talk. So there you go, loads for us to talk about over the course of the next couple of hours. James Max is here, by the way, at 4 o'clock. He'll be here with Drive. A couple of messages before we talk to Harisson Allman-Varty, Conservative Borough councillor, about what's going on with the Tories. I'm that disappointed in most parties now. I've just joined Reform, says this person on the text. Neil in Surrey says, Cristo, I can't believe that you and Zia seem to be misunderstanding the Royal Navy statement that they will not employ pushback tactics on illegal boat crossings. Literally pushing the rubber boats back with Navy warships is extremely dangerous, obviously. So what you should be asking for is to pick up the illegal migrants, return them to the place they left, regardless of whose waters they are found in, says Neil in Surrey. Thank you for that. Another one here as well. Where is it? We had a couple here as well. You are right to challenge, says Ian. We don't expect parties like Reform, though, to have perfect policies. What we expect is determination and ethos to put people of this country ahead of any other person on this planet, and to do that with compassion and clearly defined exceptions, i.e. genuine refugees. Thank you for that. You said earlier, says Sam, Reform have an uphill battle because some people may label supporters as far or extremely right, which is rubbish. They're centre-right. But anyway, both left and right have degrees of measure on both sides. But suffice to say, each side of left and right has slightly leaning, firm, hard extremists and even fascists. Both sides have a fascist side. The right, Nazi style, would be more physical and deadly, direct, and the fascist left, oppression is done more surreptitiously, using control of speech, behavioural policing, harsh law enforcement on anyone speaking against the state, offending certain categories of people, multi-tier justice, banking, spending control as a form of punishment, movement restrictions. So both sides have their extreme Orwellian left fascists and Nazi fascists. So thank you for that. Well, actually, you're quite right. The left and the fascists on the left and communist states have been responsible for huge atrocities in history as well. But I don't know why. There seems to be a perception, and you can tell me whether you think this is accurate or not, that far left, I think, in modern times is seen as something far more warm and cuddly than far right. When you're right, both are as dangerous. You're quite right. But I don't know why there isn't that perception. Maybe I'm wrong, though. But interesting point from you, Sam. Very well made. But yes, as we have been talking about, Reform seemingly set to become more popular than the Conservatives. Well, the Conservative councillor Harisson Allman-Varty for Oatlands and Burwood Park joins me live to discuss this very story. I mean, this is not great news today when it comes to the membership of Reform for Kemi Badenoch, is it? Are you there, Harisson?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. I'm loving the festive jumper. But yeah, this is bad news. Not a great Christmas gift for Penny Badenoch, for Kemi Badenoch rather, hearing that Reform are about to overtake the Conservative membership.
No, it's not. It's like you said, an early Christmas present for everybody at Reform. I personally think seeing Kemi's story today, saying that it's a marathon and not a sprint, is kind of, I guess, trying to pour water on the excitement on Reform by basically saying that it's all exciting now, but who knows what will be in a few years down the line. Personally, as someone who's on the right of the Conservative Party, and I guess a more organic Conservative, if you like, where people should be, I think it's good news because it does apply pressure on people like Kemi Badenoch and other senior figures in the Conservative Party to wake up and realise that they have to be a small C Conservative Party. Unfortunately, it's the case that lots of people within the Tory party are closet Lib Dems. And until them kind of get in line, we will continue to be split on very, very many things and struggle to cut through.
Why do you think that Kemi is not cutting through when it comes to a few of the open goals that there have been? Because a caller made this point, and I think it's a really reasonable point. Rachel Reeves's CV, the popularity of Keir Starmer being absolutely that's net zero. I mean, if you want to have a debate about net zero, there are so many open goals that the Conservatives, not just Kemi, the Conservatives in general, seemingly have missed. Why?
I completely agree. I personally think for someone like Kemi Badenoch, perhaps it's maybe inexperience. For those that were keen-eyed on her first PMQs, you can notice that her hand was shaking significantly, and understandably so. It's quite a daunting thing to do. I personally think it's a lack of kind of experience. I personally think so many people out the doorstep are just so fed up with the Conservatives still. And I think it's going to take quite a bit more time until they're maybe more receptive to hear what we have to say. I think if it is the case where we're still in this position in 4 years' time, then Reform will be on excellent footing to do very well. Because it'll be a case of they'll be fed up with Labour and their ever-increasing tax rises, and they won't want to return to the Conservatives. And they'll feel as if just by default, they will have to look elsewhere to Reform because they will not accept any other option. So you're absolutely right. I think Kemi's start has been incredibly boring. She needs to kind of talk more on a more exciting game, think of maybe policies that are popular rather than be very quiet. And I think a lot of what she's done, for example, being out in America and going to see J.D. Vance, has not been talked about at all. It's very quiet. And she just can't grab the headlines like Nigel Farage can. And that is a big problem. I tell you, and I made this point in the last hour, and maybe people think I'm being a bit soft on the Conservatives, because I have called so many times. I loathed Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, right? I mean, I don't know what he's like personally, but I couldn't stand him as Prime Minister because I was so sick by the end of him of just blustered nonsense that was nothing to back it up, constant lies that came out of his mouth, and no actual policy or ideology to back it up. So I'm finding it really difficult to criticise, based on my view, Kemi Badenoch saying, actually, you know what? I'm going to hold off for now because I want to be considered. I want to think about strategy. I don't want to start revealing policy unless I know it's thought through and unless I know it works. And so I feel like politics is crying out, actually, for a bit of that at the moment, a bit of policy that's been thought about, a bit of integrity in trying to come up with an idea that is actually deliverable. The problem is, in our 24-hour news cycle and in the vacuum that can be filled by politicians who are far better at delivering brilliant headlines like Nigel Farage, you can be as full of honour and integrity as you like. You can be as full of considered ideas that you want to think through as you like. No one's going to be interested by the time you deliver them.
You're absolutely right. That point you said at the end is the one I was just about to make. For example, look at Rishi Sunak, right? He's a politician where I thought was actually quite credible. You know, very, very intelligent. I think had a pretty decent record on the economy towards the end, as we've seen the stark contrast between Tory and Labour.
And he was a better prime minister. Sorry to interrupt you, but he was a better prime minister when he wasn't prime minister. I mean, who put 50p in Rishi when he got defeated? I don't know, because he suddenly became this brilliant statesman who was great at prime minister's questions. It was like, well, where have you been? But anyway, go on. Sorry.
Agree. It was such a shame we didn't see that more often, because he really did have some bark and bite. But the reason why I brought Rishi up is he is the contrast between someone like Boris Johnson, right? Boris Johnson is your front man, the person you put at the front to rally people up, to get people excited to go out to vote, and he's very good at that. He was very good at getting people excited and winning elections, especially those who aren't politically inclined, right? But then you had someone like Rishi Sunak, who I think was a little bit different in the sense that he was more back office, very efficient worker, very good at what he knows and does, whatever. But he struggled to connect with people because he wasn't the best communicator. Now, as we know, in politics, unfortunately, and maybe this is why our politics are so bad, communication is seen to be much more valued and more efficient than actually being able to do very good. Don't get me wrong, that is with reason, obviously. But I don't think that... I think there is definitely a balance here where Kemi does need to strike some sort of populism, because that's just how to cut through. But also be, hopefully, this perfect blend of someone who's a good communicator like Boris, but also an efficient worker like Rishi Sunak. We've yet to see that. Now, let's cut her a bit of slack. She's only been there, I guess, a month, and maybe she's planning a launch across the year and planning it all out. Who knows? I'm hoping that's the case.
It's a risky strategy, because I'm starting to think it's our fault. Like, we're getting what we deserve because we want... And I'm not knocking Reform. I think Reform have got some actually quite good ideas when you read their manifesto. But our constant complaints that we have as a nation, that we're sick of politicians that talk nonsense and don't follow through and don't actually do what they say they're going to do, well, that's because we're constantly attracted to those people that make the headlines and are full of bluster. And actually then when we actually have someone like Kemi Badenoch who says, I'm not going to do that, I'm actually going to be calm and considered, I'm going to think things through, we say, well, actually, sorry, we're not interested, where are your headlines? So we are creating these monsters. We are.
It is a solid point. I mean, I personally think that in the age we're in now, where, like, for example, on whether it's TikTok brain, that people call it, because the average attention span now is, sub 5 seconds for the 18 to 24-year-old voter. Unfortunately, that's just how things have moved. And you have to be interesting. Nigel Farage is interesting. Everything he says, people do want to listen. And he's actually one of the few politicians that actually answers a question. And he's probably the best in the business when it comes to answering a question to suit his own game.
Brilliant politician.
He's a wizard.
Absolutely brilliant politician. But whether that makes it through to actually being able to deliver on a lot of the things he says, I think is the eternal question around reform. One of the things I love to do, because I'm quite sad, is I look at a lot of Margaret Thatcher interviews. And I don't agree with everything that she ever did, but I think as a force in politics, and as an interviewer and an interviewee rather, and as a speaker and as someone who performed in Parliament, I think she was absolutely probably second to none. I mean, brilliant, and the conviction she had in what she was doing, just that ideal,
and almost somewhat intimidating, which is a good thing, I think. Almost like that air of someone that I guess respect them in the sense of that they hold that role and they are the boss. Famously, she said in an interview, she said, I think often people in the top job should feel somewhat intimidated by someone, which is a good thing.
Yeah. She said you don't want someone who is not going to be like that, and also this just unflinching. I don't care if I'm liked, because I care that I'm right, and I'm going to keep going because I think I'm right, and eventually you'll come round to me rather than me having to bend to you guys who don't agree with what I'm doing. But I think something's just occurred to me, which is incredibly worrying, is that if we had Margaret Thatcher today, and so many people message me to say, my God, we need another Margaret Thatcher, I wonder whether we'd say, sorry, you're not interesting enough for us. Sorry, you're too considered. Sorry, you're not actually giving us that amazing soundbite or headline that we want. So therefore, sorry, Margaret, but you would end up sort of on the back benches if you got into Parliament at all.
Keir Starmer will be the acid test of that, because he, I think, is going down that route. I mean, I think I might be the first person ever to draw the comparison between Margaret Thatcher and Keir Starmer, but perhaps he might be going down the route of, look, I don't care how low I sink in the polls, but when the time comes in 2029, you will be better off thanks for what I'm doing, and I'm putting the plaster off quick. That, to me, seems what he's doing. Now,
and you have to admire that a little, in as much as he's not flip-flopping. I mean, I think he's wrong in the direction we're going, but you have to admire that he's not actually flip-flopping the way that other politicians would be tempted to. But go on.
And in fairness, generally, such decisions do take time to, bear fruit. So I think, look, I don't agree with the decisions he's taken, but let's just say for 1 minute that he is bang on and right. You probably won't feel the effects of that instantly. So I'll give him a bit of the benefit of the doubt, or I don't like to give him too much. But I think the whole Margaret Thatcher issue actually on that is quite an interesting one with, for example, the likes of Reform UK, where you've got lots of people in that party who admire Margaret Thatcher, who think she's very good. I'm one of them. I think she's an excellent leader. Don't get me wrong, I don't think she got everything right, but I think she was, a real kind of trailblazer. But I think that this shows a little bit potentially of the trouble that Reform could face with ideologically. You, for example, red wall voters are likely to vote for Reform, but would probably hate the idea of voting for someone who admires Margaret Thatcher. It's the same with Reform's struggle. They have to be able to attract voters in the southeast where I am, which are generally quite hardcore capitalists, like business, like low capital gains. That's not really that compatible with northern voters, who I guess areas like this are quite socially left-wing, but economically quite right-wing. But in the north, they're a bit more socially right-wing and economically left-wing. Now, that's quite hard to merge the two. And I guess Boris was kind of trying to do that a little bit by securing those home county seats while also appealing to red wall. But
he did that by agreeing with everyone rather than actually having any policies that went across. He just literally, whoever he was in front of, he nodded and promised them something.
I personally think that will be Reform's biggest problem, will be when it does, kind of like what you touched on, when it does come to actually fleshing things out and ideologies and all that kind of merging. But who knows? That might all be wiped off by the fact of hatred towards Labour and Tory and the thirst for something new and the excitement of Reform and the growth that they're experiencing.
It's going to be a really, really interesting few years. Good to talk to you, Harisson Allman-Varty. I mean, what do you think of what you've just heard? I mean, do you agree? Do you agree that if we had a Margaret Thatcher nowadays, we'd say, well, hang on, you've not come up with something fast enough?